I was supposed to hate my new roommate. That was the plan from the moment I signed the lease. My name's Jordan, I'm 24, and after my landlord decided to raise my rent by almost 40%, I had exactly 2 weeks to find somewhere else to live. My savings weren't great, my job at a marketing agency barely covered my bills, and I wasn't about to move back in with my parents. So when I found a two-bedroom apartment that was somehow affordable, I ignored the giant red flag. Roommate assigned by the landlord. I figured, how bad could it be? Turns out, pretty bad. Or at least that's what I thought when I first met Richard. The landlord unlocked the apartment and smiled nervously. Your roommate's already here. Before I could answer, a tall guy walked out of one of the bedrooms carrying a toolbox. He looked about my age, maybe 26. Broad shoulders, dark brown hair that looked like he'd run his hand through it 100 times. Light stubble, faded jeans, black t-shirt with paint stains all over it. He barely glanced at me. You must be Jordan. His voice was calm, flat. Yeah, I'm Richard. He offered his hand. I shook it. His grip was firm, but he immediately let go and went back to tightening a loose cabinet handle in the kitchen. The landlord laughed awkwardly. Richard likes fixing things. I like things that work, Richard corrected without looking up. That should have been my first clue. He wasn't rude. He just wasn't interested. The landlord spent 10 minutes explaining the lease while Richard quietly adjusted hinges, replaced a broken light bulb, and somehow fixed the bathroom door that had been sticking. When the landlord finally left, silence filled the apartment. I looked around. It wasn't bad, small living room, tiny kitchen, two bedrooms connected by a narrow hallway. Definitely older than the listing photo suggested. Richard wiped his hands on a towel. Your room's the one on the left. Thanks. The shower only gets hot after about 30 seconds. Good to know. The washing machine leaks if you overload it. Okay. Another silence. I waited for him to say something else. Nothing. Finally, I asked, so, how long have you lived here? 3 months. You like it? It has four walls. I blinked. Right. Then he nodded once and disappeared into his room, quietly closing the door behind him. I stood alone in the living room. Great. I had officially moved in with the most boring man on earth. The first week was exactly as awkward as you'd expect. Richard left for work before I woke up. I got home before he did. Sometimes we'd cross paths in the kitchen. Hey. Hey. Long day? Yep. That was the entire conversation. Meanwhile, I learned things about him without him actually telling me anything. He woke up at 6 every morning, made coffee exactly the same way every day, cleaned up immediately after himself, never left dishes in the sink, never played loud music, never invited friends over, never complained. He was almost suspiciously organized. Meanwhile, my side of the apartment looked lived in within 48 hours. A hoodie over the couch, shoes by the door, coffee mug on the table, nothing terrible. But every morning, everything somehow ended up neatly arranged again. One evening, I finally asked him, Are you cleaning up after me? Richard looked genuinely confused. I put your mug in the dishwasher. You folded my blanket. It was falling off the couch. You lined my shoes up. They were blocking the door. I stared at him. He stared back. Sorry? He frowned slightly. I wasn't criticizing. I know. I just don't like tripping over things. I sighed. You're one of those people. What people? The organized ones. He considered that, I guess. I haven't made maybe 6 years. I noticed. I laughed despite myself. For the first time. The corner of Richard's mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but close. A few days later, everything got worse. Or so I thought. I came home after one of the worst work days I'd had in months. My boss had dumped an impossible project on me. A client hated everything we'd designed. Traffic had taken almost an hour. All I wanted was to collapse on the couch. Instead, the apartment smelled awful. Something burned. I rushed into the kitchen. Richard was standing in front of the stove, staring into a smoking pan. He looked over calmly. I may have underestimated garlic. Smoke filled the room, and I opened a window immediately. What happened? I tried cooking. Have you never cooked? I usually meal prep. So why today? And my containers exploded in the freezer. I blinked. Exploded? They were glass. That's unfortunate. It was. I looked into the pan. Whatever had once been chicken now resembled charcoal. You were actually going to eat this? I was considering it. I couldn't stop laughing. Richard looked at the pan, then at me. I don't see what's funny. You almost poisoned yourself. I don't think burnt garlic is poisonous. No, but it should be. Another pause. Then Richard laughed. Actually laughed. It surprised both of us. It wasn't loud, just one genuine laugh that completely changed his face. Suddenly he looked younger, warmer, human. I pointed at the pan. I'm ordering pizza. I can pay half. You absolutely can. Dinner turned out unexpectedly nice. We sat on opposite ends of the couch eating pizza straight from the box. The TV played some terrible action movie neither of us was really watching. So, I asked, what do you do? Maintenance supervisor? Apartment buildings? Hospitals? That explains the toolbox. He nodded. What about you? Marketing. You enjoy it? Sometimes? What about the other times? My clients exist. That earned another tiny smile. Progress. As the evening went on, conversation became easier. Not effortless, but easier. I learned Richard grew up in a small town about 2 hours away. His parents still lived there. He had one older sister. He liked hiking, didn't drink much, read mystery novels before bed, and apparently had the emotional range of a brick. Every answer was short, but never rude. He simply wasn't someone who talked unless he had something worth saying. When I finally stood to take the pizza boxes away, Richard stopped me. I'll do it. You cooked. I ruined dinner. You attempted dinner. He accepted that. As he carried the empty boxes into the kitchen, my phone buzzed. A text from my best friend. How's the new roommate? I looked toward the kitchen where Richard quietly rinsed plates that didn't even need rinsing. I smiled to myself before typing back. Weird. Quiet. Probably a robot. A second later, another message came. You hate him already? I looked up just as Richard walked back into the living room. Our eyes met. For the first time since moving in. He smiled first. Small. Almost hesitant, but real. I hesitated before replying. Actually, maybe I judged him too quickly. Over the next couple of weeks, living with Richard settled into something that almost felt comfortable. Not because we'd suddenly become best friends. We hadn't. Richard still spoke in short sentences. Still woke up at 6 every morning. Still folded blankets that didn't need folding. But the apartment didn't feel awkward anymore. It felt lived in. One Friday evening, I came home carrying 2 grocery bags. Before I could even unlock the apartment door, it swung open. Richard stood there. You forgot your keys. I looked down. Sure enough, they were still hanging from the hook inside. How did you know? You always jingle them before opening the door. I have a key jingle? You do. I laughed. I hate that you noticed that. He shrugged. You also whistle when you're thinking. I do not. You did all morning Sunday. I was home all day Sunday? You were cleaning. I stared at him. Richard? Yeah? Do you secretly work for the FBI? For the first time in days, he actually smiled. No. You notice everything. I notice patterns. That answer somehow explained everything. That weekend, we decided to finally tackle the disaster that was our tiny storage closet. Well, Richard decided, I got recruited. This is mostly your stuff, he said. I looked at the mountain of random boxes. Technically, he raised an eyebrow. All right, fine. 2 hours later, the apartment looked like someone had exploded inside it. Old textbooks, winter clothes, broken lamps, a toaster neither of us remembered owning. What even is this? I asked, holding up a strange plastic gadget. Richard glanced over. A citrus juicer. I've literally never seen that. It came with the apartment. So did the haunted toaster? It's not haunted. It turns itself on. It has faulty wiring. That's exactly what a haunted toaster would want you to think. Richard shook his head. You're impossible. You smiled. I didn't. You absolutely did. I was disappointed. Liar. He looked away, but I caught it. That tiny smile again. It was becoming more frequent. Later that afternoon, we rewarded ourselves with burgers from a place down the street. The restaurant was crowded, so we ended up sharing one side of a booth. I noticed several girls glancing at Richard. One even smiled. He didn't seem to notice. Or maybe he ignored it. So, I said, you ever date? He nearly choked on his soda. What? You heard me. He took another drink before answering. Not really. Not really. I've dated. Anyone serious? No. You? I shrugged. A couple relationships. They ended badly. One cheated. Richard's expression changed immediately. Not dramatically, just enough that I noticed. I'm sorry. It was a while ago. Still, I nodded. What about you? He looked down at the table. Timing. What do you mean? I was usually working. So work always came first? He thought about that. I guess. Something about the answer felt unfinished, like there was more he wasn't saying. But I didn't push. Monday morning started horribly. I overslept. My phone had died overnight. I woke up 30 minutes late. Oh no. I practically launched myself out of bed. As I stumbled into the kitchen, already throwing on a jacket, Richard looked up from his coffee. Morning. I'm late. I know. I have a meeting in 20 minutes. I know. I haven't even made coffee. Richard slid a travel mug across the counter. I already did. I blinked. You made me coffee? You looked tired yesterday? I picked up the mug. Exactly how I liked it. Just enough cream. 1 sugar. I stared at him. You remembered? You've made it that way every morning. I couldn't help smiling. You're kind of unbelievable. So I've been told. You really notice everything. I told you. As I rushed toward the door, I stopped. Richard? Yeah? Thanks. He nodded once. No problem. That evening, I came home carrying takeout. My turn, I called. Richard looked up from the couch. You didn't have to. I wanted to. We ate while watching a baseball game neither of us cared much about. Halfway through dinner, Richard suddenly asked, Can I ask you something? Sure. Why do you always apologize? I frowned. What? You apologize for everything. I don't. You apologize because traffic delayed dinner yesterday. That's normal. You apologize when you sneezed. Okay, maybe that one. And you apologize before asking questions. I blinked. I never noticed. I did. I leaned back. So what does that tell your detective brain? He answered almost immediately. You worry about inconveniencing people. The words caught me off guard. I laughed quietly. My therapist says the same thing. Richard looked genuinely surprised. You see a therapist? Every other week. Does it help? It does. He nodded thoughtfully. Good. I smiled. What about you? What about me? You ever talk to anyone? He looked at the television. No. Why not? I don't like talking about myself. I've noticed. Silence settled between us. Then he quietly admitted. I wouldn't know where to start. For some reason, that sentence stayed with me. A few nights later, a thunderstorm rolled through the city. The power flickered once, twice, then everything went black. The apartment fell completely silent. You've got to be kidding me. Somewhere in the darkness, Richard answered, Breaker probably tripped. You can tell already. I heard it. Of course he did. A flashlight clicked on. Richard appeared in the hallway holding 2 camping lanterns. You own emergency lanterns? I like being prepared. Are you secretly 60 years old? They were on sale. We ended up sitting in the living room with candles and takeout because neither of us could cook without electricity. Rain hammered against the windows. The apartment felt strangely peaceful. I used to love storms, I admitted. You don't anymore? My dog hated thunder. You had a dog? Golden Retriever. What was his name? Murphy. Richard smiled softly. I had one too. That surprised me. You? German Shepherd. Name? Duke. Miss him? He didn't answer right away. Every day. It was the most emotional thing I'd heard him say. I looked over. His eyes were fixed on the rain outside. You really loved him. He got me through a rough time. I wanted to ask more. Instead, I simply nodded. I get that. For several minutes, we just listened to the storm. Comfortable silence. Not awkward. Just quiet. Then lightning flashed outside. The lights came back. Richard looked almost disappointed. So much for camping, I laughed. I was about to ask if you wanted to play cards. I would have said yes. You play poker? No. Then what? He stood up and opened a drawer. Inside was an old deck of Uno cards. I burst out laughing. You own Uno? I like Uno. Richard? What? I was supposed to hate my new roommate. He looked at me with a puzzled expression. And? I smiled. I don't think that's working out. For the first time since we'd met, Richard's smile lingered. I don't think so either. By the time we'd lived together for 2 months, we had fallen into a routine neither of us ever talked about. Every Wednesday we ordered takeout. Every Friday we watched a movie. Saturday mornings meant grocery shopping. Sunday evenings somehow always ended with Richard fixing something that wasn't actually broken, while I sat nearby pretending to help. It wasn't exciting, it was just easy. And I realized one morning that I was looking forward to coming home. Not because of the apartment, because of Richard. One Saturday we were wandering through the grocery store arguing over cereal. You buy the boring kind? I said, dropping a colorful box into the cart. Richard quietly put it back on the shelf. It has too much sugar. Life needs sugar. Life needs fiber. I sighed dramatically. You really are 80 years old. I'm 26. Mentally, you're 80? He looked at another box. This one's healthier. It tastes like cardboard. You've tried it? I made that mistake once. He actually chuckled. I'll compromise. What kind of compromise? He picked up the cereal I wanted. We buy yours. I blinked. That was surprisingly easy. I don't want to hear you complain all week. So you're bribing me? I'm protecting my peace. I laughed so loudly that an older woman passing us smiled. You two make a cute couple. The words hit us both at exactly the same time. Richard froze. I nearly dropped the shopping basket. The woman simply walked away, completely unaware. I scratched the back of my neck. Richard cleared his throat. I'll go get milk. He disappeared down the aisle before I could say anything. The drive home was unusually quiet. I finally broke the silence. So, that was awkward. Richard kept his eyes on the road. People make assumptions. I guess. They were wrong. Obviously. Another silence. Then, unexpectedly, Richard spoke. My sister says that happens sometimes. What does? People assume we're dating when we go shopping together. I laughed. You and your sister? No. He looked over at me for half a second. Whoever I'm with. Oh. I wasn't sure why that answer made my chest feel strange. A week later, I came home soaked after getting caught in a downpour. The second I walked inside, Richard looked up from the couch. You're freezing. I'll survive. Without saying another word, he disappeared into his room. He came back carrying a thick gray hoodie. Wear this. I stared at it. What about you? I have another one. I'll get it wet. It dries. I hesitated. You sure? He simply held it out. The hoodie smelled faintly like cedar and fresh laundry. It was warm from hanging in his room. Somehow that made it even harder to hand back later. That evening, while I was making dinner, Richard walked into the kitchen. The sleeves fit. I looked down. Oh, I guessed your size. You guessed right. He nodded once. You can keep it until yours dries. Thanks. A few minutes later, he quietly added, It looks better on you. I almost dropped the spatula. What? He seemed surprised he'd said it out loud. The color. Oh, it's a compliment. I know. Neither of us spoke for the next 30 seconds, and the pasta nearly boiled over. A few days later, my best friend Ethan stopped by unexpectedly. Richard answered the door while I was finishing a work call. When I walked into the living room, Ethan immediately grinned. So this is Richard. Richard nodded politely. Ethan, Jordan talks about you. I turned so fast I nearly tripped. I do not. You absolutely do. Richard looked between us. I'll make coffee. As soon as he disappeared into the kitchen, I glared at Ethan. What is wrong with you? He laughed. I'm kidding. No, you're not. You've mentioned him. Because we live together. You've mentioned him a lot. I crossed my arms. So? Ethan leaned closer. You like him? I stared at him. What? You smile every time you talk about him. That's ridiculous. Is it? He barely talks. You still smile. I shook my head. He's just a good roommate. Mm-hmm. He is. Jordan? What? I've known you for 12 years. I looked away. You've got that look. What look? The one you get when you're trying very hard not to admit something. Before I could answer, Richard returned carrying 3 mugs. Conversation shifted, but Ethan kept giving me knowing looks every chance he got. After Ethan left, Richard quietly washed the coffee mugs. Your friend seems nice. He is. He worries about you. He worries about everybody. Richard dried another mug. He asked if I was treating you well. I blinked. He did? I told him I hope so. I smiled. You definitely are. He looked genuinely relieved. Good. Something about that one word felt more meaningful than it should have. 2 weeks later, Richard called me during work. He had never called me before, and I answered immediately. Everything okay? You left your laptop? My stomach dropped. No. You'll need it. I have a presentation in 45 minutes. I know. You don't have to. I'm already driving. You'd bring it all the way downtown? You need it. Richard, I'll be there in 15. He hung up before I could argue. Exactly 14 minutes later, he walked into my office lobby carrying my laptop bag, slightly out of breath, still wearing his work boots. You drove across town? You sounded stressed. I took the bag from him. I don't know how to thank you. You already did. When? You smiled. He said it so matter-of-factly that I couldn't help laughing. Then my coworkers started walking through the lobby. Several of them looked at us. One of the women from accounting smiled. Your boyfriend's sweet. I opened my mouth. Richard did the same. Neither of us managed to say anything before she disappeared around the corner. I rubbed the back of my neck. Again. Richard nodded awkwardly. They keep saying that. Yeah. He looked at me for a moment, then quietly said, You should go. Your presentation. Right. I hurried upstairs, but through the lobby window I caught one last glimpse of Richard walking back toward his truck. For some reason, watching him leave made me smile, and that scared me a little, because Ethan's words kept echoing in my head. You've got that look. I wasn't ready to admit he might be right. After the incident at my office, something shifted between us. Not dramatically, no grand confession, no awkward conversation, just little things. Richard started waiting for me before eating dinner if he knew I was working late. I started grabbing his favorite coffee whenever I stopped at the cafe near my office. Neither of us acknowledged it. It simply became normal. One Friday evening, I walked into the apartment carrying 2 paper bags. Richard looked up from the couch. You remembered. I always remember. I tossed him the burger with no onions. His favorite. He caught it easily. Thanks. What are roommates for? He looked at me for a second longer than usual. I don't know. I laughed. I wasn't expecting a philosophical answer. I'm serious. I know. He nodded and started setting the table. It struck me then how strange we probably looked. We moved around each other without thinking. I grabbed plates while he poured drinks. He handed me napkins before I asked. I reached for the cabinet at the exact moment he opened it. Neither of us bumped into the other. Months earlier, we had barely spoken. Now it felt like we'd been living together for years. Saturday morning brought another surprise. I walked into the kitchen still half asleep. Richard was standing by the counter, holding 2 hiking backpacks. What's this? You said last month you hadn't been outside the city in ages. I did. The weather's nice. I blinked. Are you asking me to go hiking? If you want. I smiled immediately. I'd love to. His shoulders relaxed ever so slightly. Good. The trail was about an hour outside the city. The air smelled like pine. Birds chirped overhead. The only sounds were our footsteps on the dirt path. I forgot how quiet this is, I admitted. Richard looked around. It's why I come here. You come alone? Usually. Doesn't it get lonely? He thought about it. Sometimes? I nodded. I get that. For a while we walked in silence. Not awkward silence. Comfortable silence. The kind that didn't need filling. Eventually we reached a lookout point overlooking a lake. I let out a quiet whistle. Okay? Worth the drive? Definitely. Richard sat on a large rock. I joined him. For several minutes neither of us spoke. The breeze was cool. The trees swayed gently. It felt peaceful. I used to come hiking with my dad, Richard said quietly. I turned toward him. You did? He nodded. Every summer? What happened? He got sick. His voice remained steady, but softer. I was 19. I felt my chest tighten. I'm sorry. He passed away 2 years later. I didn't know what to say, so I simply sat beside him. After a long silence, he spoke again. I haven't really told anyone that. I looked at him. Thank you for telling me. He gave one small nod. On the drive home, the conversation stayed quieter than usual. Not heavy, just thoughtful. As we stopped at a red light, Richard suddenly asked, Can I ask you something? Sure. Why did your last relationship end? I looked out the window. He didn't really want me. Richard frowned slightly. What do you mean? He liked the idea of me. I shrugged. But every time life got difficult, I became the problem. Richard was silent. Then he said something that caught me completely off guard. I don't think anyone should make you feel like that. I turned toward him. His eyes never left the road, but he meant every word. Thanks. He nodded once. You deserve better. For some reason, that sentence stayed with me for the rest of the day. A week later, Ethan invited both of us to his birthday barbecue. Richard almost declined. I don't know anyone. You know me, I said. I know Ethan a little. That's enough. After a long pause, he sighed. Okay. The barbecue turned out to be surprisingly fun. Richard wasn't the loudest person there, far from it, but everyone seemed to like him, mostly because he quietly helped with everything. The grill stopped working. Richard fixed it. A folding chair broke. Richard repaired it with zip ties someone found in a toolbox. Ethan walked over while Richard was talking to one of my coworkers. You know, I sighed. Don't. He really likes you. He's being polite. No. Ethan shook his head. He watches you. I frowned. What? When you walk away? You're imagining things. I'm really not. I laughed nervously. Ethan, I'm serious. Before I could answer, Richard looked over from across the yard. The second our eyes met, he smiled. Not the polite smile he gave everyone else. A softer one meant just for me. Ethan noticed it too. He leaned close and whispered, See? I looked away first. As the evening wound down, a few people started a game of volleyball. Richard refused. I'm terrible. Liar, I said. You fix everything. Not volleyball. You have no choice. 5 minutes later, Richard accidentally spiked the ball so hard it landed in someone's drink. The entire yard burst into laughter. He looked horrified. I'm sorry. I couldn't stop laughing. You just attacked Linda's lemonade. I didn't mean to. Linda laughed louder than anyone. It's only lemonade. Richard looked at me helplessly. I was laughing so hard I had tears in my eyes. Seeing me laugh seemed to relax him. Eventually, he laughed too. It was loud enough that several people turned to look. I realized then. I'd never heard him laugh like that before. It was warm, carefree, completely different from the quiet man I'd first met. Later that night, we walked home from Ethan's house. The streets were nearly empty. The summer air was cool. Thanks for making me go, Richard said. You had fun. I did. I'm shocked. So am I. We both laughed. As we reached our apartment building, Richard slowed his pace. Jordan? Yeah? I'm glad you moved in. I looked at him. The hallway light above us flickered softly. So am I. He held my gaze for a long moment, long enough that my heart started beating a little faster. Then someone opened a nearby apartment door. The moment disappeared. Richard cleared his throat. Good night. Night. I watched him disappear into his room. Then I leaned against my own bedroom door after closing it. For the first time, I stopped pretending. I wasn't just happy living with Richard anymore. I had feelings for him, and that terrified me, because I had absolutely no idea whether he could ever feel the same. For the next few days, I did everything I could to convince myself I was imagining things. Richard smiled at me. Friendly. He waited for me before eating dinner. Polite. He remembered my coffee order, favorite takeout, and exactly how I like my eggs. He just noticed details. That was who Richard was. He noticed everything, so I kept telling myself not to read into it. The problem was, it became harder every day. One Tuesday evening, I came home exhausted. Richard was sitting on the couch reading one of his mystery novels. He looked up immediately. Bad day? I dropped my bag beside the door. How did you know? You didn't say hi? I always say hi? You always do. I smiled tiredly. Tough meeting. He closed his book without hesitation. Dinner's almost ready. You cooked? I tried again. Should I be worried? A tiny smile appeared. No burnt garlic. That's already progress. When I stepped into the kitchen, I stopped in my tracks. Chicken, roasted vegetables, rice. Everything actually looked good. You made all this? I watched 3 videos. I laughed. 3? The first 2 disagreed. I couldn't stop smiling. Well, I picked up a fork and tasted the chicken. My eyes widened. Richard, what? This is amazing. This is... His ears turned slightly pink. It's edible. No. I looked at him seriously. It's really good. For just a second, he looked proud, not of the meal, of making me happy. After dinner, we ended up washing dishes together. I dried while Richard washed. Our routine. At one point, we both reached for the same towel. Our hands brushed. Neither of us pulled away immediately. It lasted maybe a second, maybe less. Still, I felt it. Richard looked at me, then quietly took his hand back. Sorry, I swallowed. It's okay. Neither of us spoke again until the dishes were finished, and that weekend Ethan invited me out for drinks. Halfway through the evening, he leaned across the table. So, I sighed. What now? You've got it bad. I don't know what you're talking about. Jordan. What? You've checked your phone 6 times. I'm expecting an email. You smiled every single time Richard texted. I looked down at my phone. Richard had sent one message. Need anything from the store? That was it. Ethan pointed at my face. Exactly. I smile at everybody. No, you do not. I rub my forehead. I can't like him. Why? Because we live together? So? If he doesn't feel the same, everything gets weird. And if he does? I looked away. I don't know. Ethan smiled. I think you already do. When I got home that night, the apartment was quiet. Richard was asleep. At least I thought he was. I quietly grabbed a glass of water. As I turned toward my room, his bedroom door opened. You made it home. You were awake. I heard you come in. Of course he did. You didn't have to wait up. I wasn't. He hesitated. I just wanted to make sure you got home safely. My heart skipped. You worried? You've been out a while. I smiled softly. I'm okay. He nodded. Good? He started back toward his room, then stopped. Jordan? Yeah? I'm glad you went. Why? You don't spend enough time with your friends, I laughed. You sound like my mother. I'll take that as a compliment. You should. He disappeared into his room. I stood there smiling like an idiot. A few days later, everything changed. Not because of us, because of the apartment. I came home to find water dripping from the kitchen ceiling. Richard? He appeared instantly. I know. You know? The upstairs pipe burst. Water dripped steadily into 3 buckets, and the landlord stood in the hallway looking exhausted. I'm sorry, guys. This is going to take a few days to repair. So what happens? I asked. The living room ceiling has to be opened. Richard crossed his arms. We can't stay here. I'm arranging hotel rooms. The landlord handed us 2 key cards. Separate rooms. Same hotel. Richard looked at the cards, then at me. We only need 1. The landlord blinked. You sure? Richard nodded. It'll save you money. I looked over in surprise. You don't mind? He shrugged. We've shared worse. We've never shared anything. We survived assembling IKEA furniture. Fair point. The landlord smiled with obvious relief. Thank you. The hotel room was nicer than either of us expected. 1 king-sized bed, a small couch, large window overlooking downtown. I looked at the bed, then at Richard. So, you take the bed. Richard immediately shook his head. No. You offered the room. You need better sleep. We're both sleeping in the bed. He looked surprised. I don't kick. I wasn't worried about that. I snore sometimes. I've heard you through the wall. You never said anything. It wasn't bad, I laughed. So that's settled. He hesitated. Okay. Later that evening, we ordered room service and watched television. It felt strangely normal, almost like being back at the apartment, until bedtime. I stood awkwardly beside the bed. This is weird. A little. We're adults. We are. We can share a bed. Yes. Neither of us moved. Finally, I laughed. We're acting like we're 12. Richard smiled. A little. The lights went out. We climbed into opposite sides of the bed. There was plenty of space between us. Too much, almost. I stared at the ceiling. You awake? I whispered. Yeah. Can I ask you something? You usually do. I smiled in the darkness. Were you really okay sharing a room? He answered without hesitation. Yes. Why? A long pause followed, then he quietly said, Because you're easy to be around. I felt warmth spread across my chest. You are too. Silence settled again. Comfortable. Peaceful. Just before I drifted off to sleep, I heard Richard's voice. So, Jordan? Yeah? I'm really glad you're here. I smiled into the darkness. So am I. Neither of us realized it that night, but lying awake only a few feet apart. We had both stopped pretending that we were just roommates. Neither of us had found the courage to say it yet, but the distance between us was becoming smaller every day. I woke up before my alarm. For a second, I couldn't figure out why. Then I realized I wasn't in my room. I was in the hotel. The curtains were still closed, leaving the room washed in soft gray light. I turned my head. Richard was still asleep. It was the first time I'd ever seen him completely relaxed. His hair was a mess, one arm stretched across the pillow, his breathing slow and steady. Without the usual serious expression, he looked peaceful. Then his eyes opened. He caught me looking. For one awkward second, neither of us said anything. Morning, he mumbled. Morning. You've been awake long? Not really. He sat up, rubbing a hand through his hair. I forgot where I was. I did too. That made him smile, a quiet, sleepy smile, one I'd never seen before. We stopped at a cafe on the way to work. The woman behind the counter looked at us. The usual? I blinked. You know us? She laughed. You've been in here every morning this week. Richard looked at me. I told you she'd remember. You notice everyone? No. He nodded toward the cashier. She notices everyone. When our drinks were ready, I reached for my wallet. Richard was faster. I've got it. You paid yesterday. So? It's my turn. He shook his head. You bought dinner. Richard? It's coffee. I sighed dramatically. I'm paying tomorrow. If it makes you happy. It does. Then tomorrow. The repairs at the apartment took longer than expected. 3 days became 5. 5 became a full week. By the end of it, sharing the hotel room no longer felt unusual. One evening we ordered dessert after dinner. The waiter smiled as he placed 2 spoons beside a slice of cheesecake. For you too. Richard looked confused. We ordered one dessert. The waiter grinned. I figured you'd share. He walked away before either of us could answer. I looked at Richard. So, we keep getting mistaken for a couple. He quietly cut the cheesecake in half. It happens. Does it bother you? He paused, then looked at me. No. The answer came so naturally that it caught me off guard. It doesn't? He shook his head. They're just making assumptions. I smiled. I guess. But somehow, knowing it didn't bother him made me strangely happy. Friday evening finally arrived. The landlord called. Apartment's ready. When we walked inside, everything looked brand new. Fresh paint, new ceiling, clean carpets. Richard looked around approvingly. They did a good job, I nodded. It feels different. It does. For some reason. Walking back into our own place felt nice, like coming home. A few nights later, I found Richard sitting alone on the balcony. He wasn't reading, wasn't fixing anything, just watching the city lights. I stepped outside. Mind if I join you? He moved his chair slightly. Not at all. For several minutes, we simply sat there. Cars passed below. A cool breeze drifted through the evening air. Finally, I asked, What are you thinking about? He answered honestly, You. I turned toward him. Me? He seemed to realize what he'd said. I mean, he searched for the right words. I've been thinking about how different things are. I smiled. When I moved in, he nodded. I expected we'd barely talk. Same. But now, he looked out over the city again. This feels like home. I swallowed. It does. Another silence. Then I quietly admitted, I was scared to move in. I know. You did? You looked terrified? I was. He looked at me with that calm expression I'd grown so familiar with. I'm glad you stayed. The words settled between us. Heavy. Honest. The following weekend, Richard's sister invited us to her birthday dinner. She wants to meet you, he explained. Nervous? A little. You don't have to be. Easy for him to say. The moment we walked into the restaurant, his sister smiled. So you're Jordan. I am. She hugged me before I could react. I've heard so much about you. I looked at Richard. You talk about me? He suddenly found the floor fascinating. Sometimes. His sister laughed. Sometimes? She turned back to me. Richard never talks about people. Richard sighed. Emily, I'm serious. She smiled warmly. But somehow every phone call turns into, Jordan said this. Jordan likes that cafe. Jordan thinks this movie's terrible. Jordan convinced me to buy colorful cereal. I looked at Richard. His ears had turned bright red. I didn't realize. Emily laughed. You've made my brother happier than I've seen him in years. Richard looked genuinely embarrassed. Can we change the subject? No. She smiled at me again. Thank you. Dinner passed in a blur after that. I couldn't stop thinking about what she'd said. Richard talked about me, to his family, more than he'd ever admitted. On the drive home, neither of us spoke for several minutes. Finally, Richard broke the silence. I'm sorry about Emily. Why? She says whatever she's thinking. I smiled. I liked her. She liked you. I could tell. He nodded once. I'm glad. When we pulled into the apartment parking lot, neither of us got out immediately. The engine stayed off. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It felt like both of us were standing at the edge of something, unsure who should move first. Richard finally spoke. Jordan? Yeah? I meant what I said. About what? This feeling like home. I looked at him. The dashboard lights cast soft shadows across his face. He held my gaze, longer than ever before. So did I admitted. Neither of us said anything else. We simply smiled. And somehow, that quiet moment said more than either of us had managed to put into words. After dinner with Emily, pretending became impossible, at least for me. Every time Richard looked at me, I wondered if there was something behind it. Every quiet smile, every drive safe, every cup of coffee waiting for me in the morning. Maybe Ethan had been right all along. Maybe I wasn't imagining everything. Or maybe I was setting myself up to ruin the best friendship I'd had in years. A few days later, work completely overwhelmed me. A major client canceled a campaign. My boss blamed our team. By the time I got home, I barely had enough energy to unlock the apartment door. Richard looked up from the kitchen immediately. You okay? I forced a smile. Long day. He studied my face for only a second. No. I blinked. What? That's not all. I sighed. The words caught in my throat. I feel like nothing I do is good enough. Richard didn't answer right away. Instead, he walked over and leaned against the kitchen counter across from me. I disagree. You have to say that. I don't. His voice stayed calm. You work harder than anyone I know. You don't know everyone. I know enough. I laughed quietly. You always know exactly what to say. No. He shook his head. I just tell the truth. Something inside me softened. I needed to hear that. I know. That Friday, Richard came home carrying a small paper bag. I saw this and thought of you. He handed it to me. Inside was a mug, dark blue. On the side, in simple white letters, it read, Everything will be okay. I looked up. You bought this for me? You said your old mug cracked. I was going to replace it. I know. I couldn't stop smiling. You remembered. You remember things that matter. I looked at the mug again, then back at him. This is probably the nicest gift anyone's ever bought me. Richard looked almost uncomfortable. It wasn't expensive. I don't care. For a second, neither of us moved. Then I stepped forward and hugged him, without thinking. The moment I realized what I'd done, I froze. Richard did too, for half a heartbeat. Then, very carefully, he hugged me back. One hand rested lightly against my back. Steady, warm, comforting. Neither of us spoke. When we finally stepped apart, Richard looked almost surprised. So, I rubbed the back of my neck. Sorry. His eyebrows pulled together. For what? You wanted a hug. I nodded. I didn't mind. He smiled softly. Actually, I liked it. That single hug changed everything. Not because anything dramatic happened afterward, because it made physical distance suddenly feel noticeable. When we watched movies, I became aware of how close we were sitting. When our shoulders brushed in the kitchen, neither of us moved away immediately. When we laughed together, our eyes lingered just a little longer. The apartment hadn't changed. We had. Sunday afternoon found us assembling a bookshelf I'd ordered online, which turned out to be a terrible idea. You skipped step 4, Richard said. I did not. You definitely did. I improvise. You create problems. I create opportunities. He looked at the instruction manual. The shelf is upside down. I stared at it. Maybe. He laughed. A real laugh. You never read instructions. They limit creativity, and they prevent furniture from collapsing. We both laughed. By the time the bookshelf was finally standing, we'd somehow ended up sitting on the floor surrounded by cardboard. I think we deserve pizza, I announced. I agree. Did you just agree with me? I do that sometimes. You hide it well. He smiled. I know. Later that evening, we carried our pizza onto the balcony. The sunset painted the sky orange and pink. This is nice, I said. It is. I don't think I've ever enjoyed living somewhere this much. Richard looked at me. Neither have I. The breeze stirred gently around us. I turned toward him. Can I ask you something? You usually do. I smiled. When you first met me. He nodded for me to continue. What did you think? He considered the question. I thought you talked too much. I laughed. Fair. I also thought... He hesitated. You smiled even when you were nervous. You noticed? I notice everything. I looked down. What else? His voice became quieter. I thought you made the apartment feel less empty. My heart started pounding. You did? He nodded. I just didn't know how to tell you. I swallowed hard. You don't always have to know the perfect words. No? No. He looked at me for a long moment. I've never been very good at this. At what? Letting people get close. I understood immediately. You've been trying. Yes? You've done a pretty good job. He smiled. I had help. We sat there until the sky turned dark. Neither of us wanted to go inside. Finally, I stood. I'm going to make tea. I'll help. You always help. I know. As we walked back into the apartment, our hands brushed again. This time, neither of us pulled away. Our fingers stayed lightly touching for just a second. Richard looked at our hands, then at me. There was no panic, no awkwardness, just a quiet understanding. Neither of us said anything, but we both knew. The next conversation we had would change everything. The next morning I woke up before Richard. That almost never happened. I stood in the kitchen making coffee when I heard his bedroom door open. He stopped the moment he saw me. Morning. Morning. Neither of us moved. Something about the apartment felt different, not because anything had changed, because we both knew we couldn't keep pretending forever. Richard finally broke the silence. Can we talk? My heart immediately started racing. Yeah. We carried our coffee onto the balcony. It was early enough that the city hadn't fully woken up yet. Cars rolled quietly through the streets below. For almost a minute, neither of us spoke. Then Richard took a slow breath. I'm not good at this. I know. I've been trying to figure out what to say. You don't have to make it perfect. He smiled nervously. I know. Another pause, then he looked directly at me. When you first moved in, I nodded. I thought we'd just split rent. I laughed softly. So did I. I didn't expect you. What does that mean? He looked down at his coffee. It means... His voice became quieter. You became the best part of my day. I felt my chest tighten. Richard continued before he could lose his nerve. I started looking forward to hearing your keys at the door. He smiled to himself. Your key jingle. I laughed through the emotion building in my throat. I looked forward to Wednesday takeout. Friday movies. Grocery shopping. He shook his head. I've never had someone make ordinary life feel... He searched for the word. Important. I looked at him. You did the same for me. His eyes met mine. I don't think I've been acting like just a roommate for a long time. No. You probably noticed. I couldn't help smiling. You notice everything. That made him laugh. Not everything. What did you miss? He looked at me for a long moment. That you might feel the same. I stared at him. You didn't know? He honestly looked surprised. I wasn't sure. I laughed in disbelief. Richard. What? I've been in love with you for months. His eyes widened. You... I kept trying not to. A slow smile spread across his face. I've been trying not to love you too. Neither of us moved. Neither of us needed to. Because suddenly everything made sense. Every shared dinner. Every cup of coffee. Every remembered detail. Every lingering glance. Every quiet smile. Richard took one careful step closer. So, can I hug you again? I smiled. You never had to ask. This time when he wrapped his arms around me, there was no hesitation, no uncertainty. I held him just as tightly. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The city continued waking up around us. Cars passed, birds chirped somewhere nearby. None of it mattered. Richard quietly laughed against my shoulder. What? I spent months wondering if you liked me. I pulled back just enough to look at him. I spent months wondering if you even noticed me. He smiled. Jordan, I noticed you the first day. The day I burned garlic? He nodded. You laughed. I almost called the fire department. I know. And somehow, I smiled. That was the beginning. A week later, Ethan invited us over for dinner. The moment we walked in together, he looked between us. Then he grinned. You finally told him. Richard looked confused. You knew? Ethan laughed. I've known since Jordan wouldn't stop talking about you. I buried my face in one hand. Oh, come on. He carried your favorite coffee creamer across town because the grocery store near your office didn't have it. Richard looked embarrassed. I was already driving. Ethan pointed dramatically. Exactly. We all laughed. For the first time, Richard didn't seem uncomfortable with the attention. Instead, he slipped his hand into mine under the table. Small, natural, comfortable, exactly like everything else between us. A month later, Emily came to visit. The second she walked into the apartment, she stopped. Then she looked at our joined hands. Finally, she looked at Richard. I knew it. Richard sighed. You've known everything before I do. Emily hugged both of us. It was obvious. It wasn't obvious, Richard argued. It really was. She smiled at me. Take good care, my little brother. I smiled back. I plan to. Richard quietly squeezed my hand. Life didn't suddenly become perfect. We still argued over cereal. Richard still folded blankets. I still left mugs on the coffee table. He still woke up at 6. I still slept through alarms. Some evenings we ordered pizza. Other nights Richard cooked. His garlic never burned again. Saturday hikes became our tradition. Friday movie nights never stopped. The apartment stayed small, but it never felt cramped. It felt like home. Because home had never really been about the walls. It had become the person waiting on the other side of the front door. Almost a year after I moved in, I found the original lease while cleaning out a drawer. I laughed as I held it up. Richard looked over from the couch. What? I remember signing this. So do I. I was convinced I was going to hate my new roommate. Richard smiled. How'd that work out? I walked over and sat beside him. Pretty terribly. He laughed. Terribly? I was supposed to hate you. And instead? I leaned over and kissed him, slowly, gently. When we pulled apart, he rested his forehead against mine. Instead, I smiled. I found the person I want to come home to every day. Richard's smile was the same one that had first appeared after the burnt garlic incident. Small, quiet, completely genuine. I think, he whispered, we both got a much better deal than just a roommate. I nodded. We really did. And every time I hear my keys jingle outside our apartment door, Richard still opens it before I can unlock it. He says he recognizes the sound. I think he just likes being the first one to welcome me home.